how motivated are you, they also influence your perception of how hard it is. So those things combine together to create this sense of effort, which is the ultimate arbiter of whether you're able to go on or not. So let me give you a few examples of some of the kinds of evidence that people have, that scientists have come up with to sort of demonstrate that yes, the brain plays a key role in setting what feel to us like physical limits. One example comes from a guy named Samuel Marcora, who's a researcher in England. A couple years ago, he did an experiment with subliminal images. So he brought in a bunch of cyclists to do time trial or time to exhaustion tests in his lab. And on the screen in front of them, he flashed pictures of either a smiling face or a frowning face. And the catch was that these images were flashed in 16 millisecond bursts. So that's about a tenth the length of a blink. So the cyclists were totally unaware that there were any pictures flashing in front of them. After the study, they reported not being aware. They had no idea they'd seen any pictures. But those who were shown happy faces or smiling faces were able to cycle for 12% longer in the test than those who were shown frowning faces. And I like this study for a couple of reasons. One is that the cyclists weren't aware of the intervention. Because when you talk about the brain and endurance, there's lots of ways of manipulating the brain, but it's very hard to do it without placebo effects. If you do a sports psychology intervention, you know that it's happened. So it's very hard to separate out whether you just end up expecting to do better, so you do better, or your motivation is higher. In this case, the subjects had no idea that anything had happened. As far as they were concerned, they had just done two time trials. But one was better because they'd unconsciously seen a smiling face. So how does that work? Why would a smiling face help? It's not entirely clear, but the general thinking is that basically when you see a smiling face, it sort of generates a sense of ease in you. You feel a little happier about things. And so your sense of effort is this integration of how you feel. And you're getting all these signals from your body about how your lactate levels are and how your heart rate is. But it's being nudged by also the sense of whether you're seeing a happy face or if you're in the presence of happy faces, you just interpret those signals a little less threateningly than if you see a frowning face. And so the same pace feels a tiny bit easier. And so you're able to go a little bit longer before you give up. So to me, that's one good example of the idea that you can see these images and it doesn't change anything about your heart rate. It doesn't change anything about your lactate levels, but it does change your endurance. So it's the brain that's calling the shots there. Another example is electric brain stimulation. And so there's a body of research that goes back to about 2013 that involves basically taking a 9-volt battery, sticking 2 wires to it, and connecting them to electrodes on your head, and running electricity through your brain. This doesn't sound like a good idea. Maybe there should be a disclaimer here of do not try this at home. Although there is actually a pretty vibrant DIY community doing this kind of electric brain stimulation because it's supposed to have all sorts of effects. It's a really overhyped and sort of poorly regulated area, but there's some legitimate science. And so what happens when you run this current through your head, and it's a very weak current, there's no like convulsions or anything, it sort of feels like ants crawling on your head. But it changes the excitability of the neurons underneath the electrodes. It makes them either slightly more likely to fire or slightly less likely to fire for about an hour. So you run the current for about 10 minutes, and then for about an hour, the excitability is a little bit different. And if you choose the right place for the electrodes, you can focus on an area of the brain involved with sending signals to your muscles. And as a result, you end up changing your perception of effort. You end up, for a given level of exercise, for a given pace of running, it will feel a little bit easier for about an hour. And as a result, you'll be able to go faster or farther for the same effort level. There are definitely some caveats we should throw in here. Beyond don't try this at home. I think there's some ethical concerns with is this what we want sports to be? I have a couple daughters. I really don't like the idea of when they get to high school, if they want to try out for the volleyball team or something, it's like, hey Dad, let's go to the hardware store and pick up some 9-volt batteries. That's not what I want, both for safety concerns and also for just the spirit of the sport. And I should say that there is actually a Silicon Valley company out there that's already selling headphones that deliver electricity to your head. And athletes are using this. There are athletes at the Ironman World Championships using that, and at the Winter Olympics using electric brain stimulation. I actually wrote an article a couple of years ago for the New Yorker about this company, Halo Neuroscience, and their headphones. And my conclusion was basically, so it's really finicky to get this effect to work. So there was a study in 2013 showing that you could enhance endurance. There have been about a dozen studies since, and a lot of them haven't worked and some haven't. I think in the last few months they've finally sorted out some of the problems of figuring out where the best place to put the electrodes are. So I'm reasonably confident that this effect really does work. But I'm not at all confident that these headphones you can buy commercially for $700 actually deliver current to the right place. So I wrote this article saying I thought that it was basically a giant placebo effect. And I got an email from their PR agency right away, or the PR reps saying, "That was a fantastic article, we loved it." And I was like, "What? I thought I said you guys were basically a bunch of scammers." No, we loved it. So it's like the dictum of all publicity is good publicity. They loved it, and they were like, "Hey, can we send you a pair to try out for 4 weeks?" And I don't generally do product reviews, it's not really my bag, but I was writing this book and I thought it could be pretty interesting. If I'm going to write about it, it'd be interesting to try it and just see, maybe I can track my running parameters, see if it does something for me. So they sent me a pair and I tried them. Now, you may not have noticed, but I actually don't have a lot of hair. And apparently the weather in Toronto does bad things to your skin or something, or toughens your scalp. Because these headphones, you have the headphones and then they have a layer of like spikes over the top of your head, foam spikes that's where they deliver the electricity. And they wouldn't make contact with my head. So I had to be like jamming them into my head. And when I finished, I'd have like 32 little holes in my head. I have some pictures, so it's actually pretty gruesome. And so I couldn't get it to work. And then occasionally I'd be able to press it so hard that I could make electrical contact. So then I'd turn on the current, and it would be like burning my scalp. So I was like, this is brutal. And I was calling the company, I was like, is this supposed to happen? And they're like, oh, maybe just 1 out of every 100 people, don't worry about it. I'm like, well, I guess I'm special. But so I basically didn't get it to work very much. On the very few times I actually managed to endure 20 minutes of stimulation, I had like the worst runs in history because my head was aching. So all this is to say, don't go buy a pair of Halo Neuroscience headphones. But, bringing it back to my actual point, leaving aside the attempts to profit off this, the research is interesting. It's like, again, here's something you can do to the brain that does nothing below the neck, and you can increase your endurance. And that tells you again that under normal circumstances, when you're not zapping your brain is calling the shots. It's holding you back a little bit. There's another example that's a little bit older, so some of you may have already be familiar with this. You can enhance your performance by taking a sports drink, swishing it around in your mouth, and spitting it out. And this is actually kind of a profound finding because it doesn't work with artificially sweetened drinks. So it's not just that you like the sweetness and it makes you feel good. It does work with a tasteless carbohydrate called maltodextrin. So somehow through ways that actually scientists haven't figured out yet, but somehow your brain, there's some sensors in your mouth that detect energy content, and your brain is aware of when you have calories or carbs in your mouth. And then you can spit it out. So the whole point of sports drink is that you're sending fuel to your muscles. And if you spit it out, the fuel doesn't get to your muscles. So it shouldn't do anything, but it does because your brain thinks fuel is going to your muscles. And there's some other wrinkles to this body of research, which, for example, it doesn't work if you have a meal or a bunch of carbohydrates right before the exercise. So if your fuel tank is full, your brain doesn't care if you're tricking it by swishing sports drinks. It's only if your fuel tank is partly empty does swishing a drink in your mouth help. So this is a really complex and subtle calculation that your brain is doing. It's monitoring how quickly you're using energy, how much energy you have, how far you intend to continue, and then it's deciding, oh, okay, more fuel's on the way, we're going to release the brakes a little bit. And what that means is if you don't trick your brain, if you just go for an ordinary run, what feels like the fastest you can go is not the fastest you can go, because you could go faster if you pretended that you had fuel. So again, your brain is holding you back in ways that are unconscious, you're not aware of it, and it's involuntary. You don't want your brain to hold you back. You don't care if you run out of fuel at the end of the race, but it's being cautious and it's protecting you. So those are 3 examples of, and I should say actually, that one actually has some practical value. You see a lot of marathoners and triathletes and cyclists now rinsing and spitting sports drink towards the ends of races because, if you've been out there 4 hours, there's a good chance you're really sick of, your kiwi gels or whatever the case may be, and you may be having stomach problems from trying to choke down fuel. Well, towards the end of a race, you can just say, okay, it doesn't even matter. It's not going to get to my muscles anyway. All I need to do is convince my brain that some fuel is going. And you can't. That's not so useful early in the race because you can only trick yourself for so long. You actually are going to run out of fuel. But towards the end of a race, it's actually a pretty good tactic if you're within the last half hour of a race to just rinse it around in your mouth for 5 or 10 seconds, spit it out, and you'll get some of the benefits of that sports drink without necessitating a trip to the porta potty or whatever the case may be. Okay, so those are 3 examples of things that I think are compelling illustrations of the brain limiting performance. You can also go outside the lab and move from sort of science.